Okay, so I'm just gonna show you how I do my heels. I've already got the hem hung, and I did 40 rows for my leg, and this is my center marker for the cylinder. So the first thing that I do is lift up half of the stitches. So it's kind of hard because of the counter there, so I kind of just turn it and make sure that I catch all these stitches here. So I'll lift all those. Sometimes they get a little bit turned in the cylinder here, so I just make sure they all lifted all the way. And then I'll finish this, so go a little bit past. You'll notice it stops cranking, like you won't hear that click, 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 and it'll be really smooth for a minute. And that's kind of where you want to stop and hang. I've got, I bought these Dean & Bean heel forks, but you can, I guess you can also just pull it down. That's a little too fiddly for my brain to do, but there's a bunch of different places you can get heel forks from too if you don't have them already. So I hang 3 heel forks when I'm doing this, and then I'll have to adjust them a lot as I go along here. But I try to do it right away just so I don't lose any stitches. Okay, so this is my starting marker. This is my halfway marker. And then I have 2 points on here is where I'll stop lifting needles and then switch to wrapping my stitches. So the first row, I just lift up this first needle and the yarn's in between there. You can kind of see it. It's right behind the rest of the needles there. So then you crank back and it creates a little wrap around that first needle. And I make sure, I kind of go slow when I first start because I like to make sure all the stitches caught. And then similar on this side. So the yarn will be behind and you lift up the first one on this side now. Crank across these. And then I'll just keep lifting up 1 needle at a time across this row until I get to those light purple marks there. So I usually do like 3 or 4 rotations before I start moving my heel forks up a little bit. So I just kind of lift them up. If you don't move up the heel forks, you'll start dropping stitches, and that's kind of messy to deal with. And I also go slow once I move those to make sure that I don't lose any stitches. Sometimes they kind of drift a little bit on those first couple stitches there. Time to lift them up a little bit again. Okay, so I lifted that. And if you ever forget if you lifted a needle or not, you can tell where that yarn is. So you'll want it to be in between 2 lifted stitches. So right there. Every now and then I have to walk away for a second and forget where I left off. Okay, I'm going to do one more time lifting up these weights because we're on the last stitches here, and it's easier to move them now than when you start dropping things. So that one. So now I'm inside the purple mark on that side, and this is the last one I have to lift on this side, so I'll crank it. So now I've got all of my decreased stitches, and now I'm going to start increasing back up by knitting those wrapped stitches. So the first stitches after that mark, you'll do 2, and then every one after that until one before the pink, I'll knit 1 at a time, and it goes the same on both sides. So this is 2 all the way to 1, and then stop before we get to that last one. So the first thing that I do is pluck this yarn up over those 2 first stitches I'm going to knit. This is kind of hard to see, so it'll be a little bit more visible when I turn it the other way, but let's see if I can move this yarn out of the way. So I pull the needle forward, and that wrap stitch there, I pull that forward and I leave the other stitch on there and drop this down so it'll catch in between the hook there, the wrap stitch, but the unwrapped stitch, just the normal stitch, is still on the hook. So what will happen when I crank it then is it'll knit just that stitch, and then when I keep cranking past that point, it'll actually create the whole new stitch after. So those 2 are done. So now I'm going to crank. This one I also go really slow with because, so the first step is knit those so the wraps are gone, and I want to make sure that the yarn stays below that lever there, and then this yarn that's coming through the feeder goes in between it, so we catch that. Okay, so those 2 first wrap stitches are done on this side. I'm going to do the same thing on this side here. So I'm going to pull this yarn back and go through those 2. And then you can see here, this top stitch is the wrap, and the bottom stitch here is going to be just our normal knit stitch that happens. So when I pull this forward, it creates this little space here that I pull forward and then drop that in there. So I keep that stitch underneath that. So you can see there's one below the lever and one above. The wrap stitch goes above. So pull it forward, grab that wrap, and then hook in between it. And then I'm gonna turn it. And again, sometimes this yarn, when I'm turning it, will go over a stitch and you'll drop it. I try not to do that because it's a little bit more finicky to fix. So just go slow. Okay, so those are the first 2. Now I'm gonna do the single stitches until we get to the point where we need to start cranking forward again for the foot of the sock. So I'm gonna start doing a stitch here and pull this forward, grab that, and push down this needle. It's harder on the back side because you can't really see as well, but once you like kind of understand the mechanics of how this stitch pulls, you'll be able to do it pretty easily. So there we go. We've got 3 on this side now and 2 done here. So we're going to even it out on this side. So pull it forward, drop it in between, let that go. So see how that, when that dropped down, it knits that wrap stitch. And now we're going to knit again with the working yarn. So it looks like there's a hole here, but once you take this off the machine, it closes them up pretty tightly, so you won't really see it. I've not noticed any issues with them so far. And I've been wearing my hand knit socks for, gosh, 2 months now. That's pretty much all I've worn. It's great. So cranking forward. Again, just kind of trying to keep an eye on all the different functions happening here. So make sure this stays through your feeder. Make sure your weights are pulling down on all these stitches so you're not dropping anybody. We're going to want to make sure we knit this wrap stitch down. And keep going forward. Now you can keep knitting to a point where it starts cranking and dropping stitches on the side. We don't want to do that. Make sure you're going the opposite way. If you crank too far past it, you'll drop stitches. I've lost a few socks that way and had to restart them. It's kind of frustrating. right, in between, pull it forward, find that loop, and drop it in. And I'm gonna grab another one, pull it forward, and there you go. Drop it down. So the nice thing is once you've learned how to do this for the heels, the toes are the same. You'll just, instead of continuing on to knit a foot, you'll just do a row or two in the round, which is what you'll Kitchener shut when you're done. And then I do waste yarn for, a couple inches usually, just so I don't lose any of my working stitches before I seam these toes together. Eventually I'll probably do a toe stitching tutorial as well. So I can feel like a little pull on here. So now I'm gonna just kind of scoot these weights just a little bit, just to make sure I don't drop anybody. It's fixable for some, but sometimes it's easier just to restart the whole sock. I'm not gonna lie to you. I've torn a couple out, got frustrated with them, like dropped too many stitches and they fall down too far. And thankfully these take about, I think I've got it down to like an hour or so now. So in between there. I'm getting closer to that last stitch there. So then we can talk about how to finish the heel and crank the foot a bit. So count it. Everybody got below their levers. Good. These first couple stitches are the ones that probably drop the most, so definitely pay attention when you're cranking on those. Especially with the wrap stitch, because they're a little harder to keep track of and recapture. See, I saw that didn't catch right. There we go. Another kind of way for this back one so I can tell that I got it right. This lever will stay open because it's being pulled down by that wrap stitch. So now I've got one stitch left on here. So I'm gonna knit this one and then I'm gonna crank all the way through. So let's get this one on here. So this row I especially try to go slow on because I need to make sure I don't continue on past it, because you get into a habit a little bit with the cranking back and forth. I did mark right here on my machine. This is where the cams kind of start. I put that there so that I know if I go past this point, I can't drop these needles down anymore. You can still kind of go back and kind of hand knit them to catch them later on in the row, but try to avoid that as much as I can because this is a much easier way to do it. So this is the last stitch that I'll have to wrap. So I caught that one here, and the rest I just pull forward the needle and drop the whole thing below that lever. So when it knits around, it'll knit in the normal fashion. So we're gonna have to do that for all these stitches all the way until we get back to our normal row. So I missed a stitch here. Sometimes you can kind of push it a tiny bit back. If you push it too far back, you'll drop a stitch. Thankfully that one caught. So just try to take your time with it. I think that was the biggest part for me, is just remembering to be patient with learning it. Once in a while, they'll get the lever will get caught in here and you'll see it underneath there. So try to make sure you don't get those caught underneath there. I should say too, this is actually a dental tool that I'm using, or a sculpting tool. I got it at the craft store in the clay modeling section. But I also have another hook that I really like. It's this Addy hook. And this one has a really nice, like, curved, I don't know if you can see that little curved end there. That catches stitches pretty good too if you need some ideas on tools. So there's that last one. So this last stitch here is going to be a wrap too. So we're going to want to make sure we pull on the right side and get that in between there. See, that missed a little bit, so I'm going to try it again. Pull this forward. You go in the middle. There we go. Okay, so now all my needles are back down. I'm going to crank all the way to the start of the row, which is that pink marker again. And I have caught all my stitches now. So I've got a heel in here. I do leave the heel forks on usually for like 20 to 30 rows before I can clasp it together and put my soft weight up higher, just because it kind of pulls the stitches evenly. So I'm gonna crank a bit here. I do try to go slow a little bit here too to make sure I'm catching everything. I have a habit of, because I'm like nervous that I'm gonna drop stitches, I set my fingers on here gently a lot, like they're not putting weight on it or anything, but just so I can feel that it's gone below the lash. Or I'll crank really slow, because if you can kind of feel it tug when it does drop a stitch. I did forget to reset my counter actually. So that's something that I try to do once I finish those heel rows, is reset my counter so I know how long I make my sock. Usually I wear a women's size 10, and so I'll usually knit my sock length to 60 or 65 depending on how tense the yarn is that I've made. This one's kind of a looser tension, so I'll probably do 60 for this one. Just so I have a little bit of tightness to the sock, because you kind of want a negative ease on them. You can kind of count your stitches too by the bars here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I'm at about 12 rows, which kind of makes sense. I stopped at that point because I calculated it to be around 10, so this would make me want to go to 52. Okay, so this would be like 35 since I had those 10 rows on there. So I'll take these soft weights off now. And I do have my soft weight. It is way down in here. The bonnet I use has a yarn on the end, so I can untie it and pull it out instead of having to stick my arm down that tube and try not to like fuss with my stitches. I did make this one actually from a Dean and Bean tutorial. But I really like this bonnet. It's my favorite one I made. And then I just tie it tight and make another bow on there. Okay. I did put a stripe in here too because this is a sock set that I wanted to try and add that blue in a different way than my normal just heels and toes. So I kind of try to gather where above the heel, because there's a lot of extra fabric where the heel's at, and clasp this on here and push it up a bit, and then I'll put my soft weight back in place. And then I can keep cranking. Okay, so this is my 50 rows, which is actually 60, because I forgot to reset that. So everybody is ready. Now that I've got the foot to the length I've wanted, I'll actually do the identical technique as I did here, and I'll also do it in the same space. So the pink, between the pink and the purple here. Okay, so I kind of wanted to be able to pull this heel out a little bit so you could see that it's got the stitches on here. You can see where the wraps were, but once it's on your foot, it's darn near impossible to feel that. I like this technique a lot. It's what I've been using for all the socks I've made. I think I've made probably like 15 or more pairs now with this wrap and turn heel and toe. And I hope you are able to make sense of this video. I'm gonna try and make another one eventually, hopefully when there's more daylight outside. I've got my light on right now trying to make sure you can see this one. So good luck, and I'm around if you need anything.